I'd like to introduce my hero, the next speaker, Chuck Wilson. Chuck is GoMRI's Chief Scientific Officer, a very essential key member of the GoMRI team. Prior to joining GoMRI, he was a professor, department chair, vice provost LSU, and more important, director of the Louisiana Sea Grant Program. So he's been with us at every step of the way. Chuck, it's all yours.
Wow, thank you very much, Rita. You're my hero too, so the feeling's very mutual, so thank you. Delighted to be here, and I want to also thank the Sea Grant team for organizing these events, and thank in advance our excellent panelists. We the GoMRI team, ask a great deal of our research and outreach leaders, and they have been critical and very effective in delivering GoMRI science to the community. I just wanted to give a brief perspective on the scale of GoMRI. This is a look back at federal investment in the Gulf region compared to other large bodies of water in the United States. It's an older table from the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management. The left axis is millions of dollars, and what it clearly illustrates is GoMRI has lagged way behind other regions of the country associated with large bodies of water like the Great Lakes and the Chesapeake Bay. The arrow illustrates roughly the annual investment GoMRI put into the Gulf region for that brief 9-year period we had funds to give out. And for that short time period, it did put the Gulf on par with the other very large water bodies you all are so familiar with, but it illustrates we clearly need to do more. Next slide, please. The GoMRI consortia and small teams of researchers are distributed throughout the country. This is a footprint of the investment that GoMRI has made that's gone to over 280 institutions. Granted, we've had the benefit of a large sum of money that could attract a lot of different people from various areas, but it also demonstrates that there were talents all over the country needed to tackle the diverse problems that were facing the Gulf. BP's directive to GoMRI was to build capacity in the region. We were successful in supporting and making possible great research teams focused on the Gulf region, located in the Gulf, but that was built in part on the expertise of people from around the United States and the world. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to briefly go through some of the science highlights that we would encourage you to look at on the GoMRI website if you'd like to learn more. The first is the topic is transport. GoMRI made huge investment in oil transport and modeling studies, which inquired investment in learning more about surface and subsurface currents. These investments brought to life improved understanding of large-scale, medium-scale, and fine-scale current movement, both surface and subsurface, that would affect particle movement. These studies have already affected and advanced future tracking of oil, Coast Guard vessel and personnel recovery, and storm forecasting. The second thing, it illustrates that microbes and plankton had distinct interaction with oil that produced this material called marine snow. It's an exudate, it's very sticky, and estimates are that 10 to 15% of the oil that was around at the time this matrix formed was bound up and transported to the bottom, and it's primarily microbially mediated. This process has now been accepted as part of the transport mechanism of oil, the fate of oil, and most of that is now bound up in the sediment out in the deep ocean. And then the third image is back in the laboratory. Johns Hopkins scientists looked at the effect of droplets being expressed from the surface due to waves and rainfall using high-speed holographic imaging. And they documented these aerosolized droplets of oil that were actually smaller than most of the hazmat gear used by first responders, and has raised questions on the safety of that equipment. And so they're actually, the responder support teams are actually rethinking how to design the hazmat gear so it's safer from a public health concern. Next slide. Biodegradation is a fascinating process, and we've funded a large number of microbial ecology studies within the GoMRI community. It really wasn't surprising to find out that there was a resident, prepared, if you will, microbial community in the Gulf that responded quickly to the oil. It's a very important part of the fate of oil in the degradation process, and it's actually fairly unique to the Gulf. Not all areas of the world have it. They're present in the Gulf because of the large number of natural seeps that we have that slowly leak oil out into the environment. Scientists found on the beaches there was almost an immediate response by oil-degrading bacteria that changed the bacterial makeup of the beach communities for about a year. And after that oil was digested, the microbial community went back to its original state. We found the same response in the open ocean, the deep ocean, and in the marshes. So our chemists are learning how to follow this change using new and novel techniques. Not surprising that our scientists found that nitrogen actually enhanced microbial oil degradation processes. It's actually been proposed as a way to accelerate microbial degradation during an oil spill. So that was documented. And we also documented some teams in Germany that high pressure actually inhibits microbial degradation, which is also not surprising. Next slide, Jen. Another major area of GoMRI investment is into the impact on the marshes. And I'm sure you all saw disheartening images of the oil as it rolled up on the Louisiana and into the Alabama beaches onto many of our charismatic wetland organisms. What they found was that damaged vegetation in non-eroding areas nearly fully recovered after about a year and a half. In areas where the vegetation was killed and they were already eroding, the oil marsh grasses died, exposing the substrate and actually accelerated erosion rates. We have a sadder story about marine mammals, which are the dolphins that inhabit the coastal bays of Louisiana, particularly Bay Jimmy and Barataria Bay. They were shown to have been seriously impacted by the oil, and those impacts continue. Researchers documented high pregnancy failure rates, lung damage, not unlike COPD and emphysema, and those are still present today. And this entire generation of dolphins in these regions will bear that burden throughout their lifetimes, as far as we know. Nearly 9 years after the spill, there is still evidence of oil in the marshes where it penetrated deep down into the sediment. Oil actually flowed down into crab burrows, and you can still find it there today where the sediment is fairly anaerobic and decomposition is extremely slow. They say it'll be decades before that's mitigated, particularly in Louisiana. Next slide. Thank you, Jen. We had a really interesting team of deep water habitat, which is really where the oil spill occurred. Baseline data on these communities was almost non-existent, which really illustrates the challenges that our scientists faced as in our research program. It's a fascinating yet poorly understood community in the deep waters of the Gulf. It's called mesopelagic community. It's made up of crustaceans, plankton, young fish, and some adult fish that are very odd, like those anglerfish you see on the right. They've adapted to living in the deeper, darker parts of the ocean. This could be food source for predatory fishes like whales. They come and feed in the Gulf of Mexico on this community. This community was found to be depressed shortly after the spill, and it has to recover. And related to that, we have found that the whales that to migrate through this region are no longer coming into this region, and it's possible it's because of the depression of this food source. Fortunately, this team of scientists based at Nova University in Florida has been funded in a follow-up study to continue to document and describe this community. Another impacted community was some very delicate deep water coral communities. These soft corals, both near and away from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Plume area, can live to be 800 years old, and these branched corals you see on the right were found to be damaged, in some cases smothered by oil and dispersant oil mixtures, and these will take a long time to also recover. Again, they're poorly understood community. The big find on was we have highly efficient methane eating or consuming microbes that are out in the deep ocean that responded to the spill and began to digest methane, which is a gas that was solubilized because a lot of that methane didn't make it to the surface. And it was documented that almost immediately after the spill, this community rapidly increased in abundance and persisted until the spill was stopped. Next slide, Jen. There's been a lot of controversy about dispersants, and those of us that lived along the Gulf Coast at the time of the spill had heard about dispersants being sprayed at the surface and injected into the deep ocean. And so we're frequently asked the question, would you use it again? There have been a number of studies on dispersants' effects on a variety of different topics, and these are just a few examples. It was found early on in our research program that as surfactants and dispersants both helped and hindered oil-degrading bacteria. The purpose of dispersant is to break up the oil into smaller droplets so oil can be consumed by bacteria and also keeps it from getting to the surface. Researchers, the second slide, assessed through predictions multiple oil spill models, and they found that during the response, oil spills did reduce droplet size when being ejected into the plume. So that was good news, and that's continued to hold up in subsequent years of research. It was also found, and this has been documented through a variety of aerial surveys using satellite technology, that the release of subsea dispersants did reduce, although marginally, the surface oil expression as the spill was taking place. Next slide. To recap some of what Rita said, we have a number of different legacies that GoMRI will leave behind. One is certainly the impact of our research funding, increasing that money going into the Gulf for that 9-year period. The wonderful networks of scientists and people like you that have been built through these collaborations and discussions. The huge number of graduate students that will make up the next workforce generation, particularly focused on Gulf of Mexico science. As you heard the Admiral mention, the Gulf of Mexico Oil Spill and Ecosystem Science Conference will continue in a new shape and form. Rita mentioned GridC, the tremendous data archival system that GoMRI built that will be there for the future. And last but not least is the contribution to the scientific body of knowledge that has been made by GoMRI. So, Missy, thank you very much. I think I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the talk.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Thanks for taking the time. And I know you're joining us from Phoenix this evening. So I really appreciate you dealing with the differences in time. And at least it's a little earlier in the evening there, though I know the great state of Arizona does not adhere to daylight savings time. So thanks so much for joining us, Chuck.